Thanks, Jonathan. It's great to see all of you here this morning. And I want to take a couple minutes to really talk about how the African American Board Leadership Institute came into being, what the vision we have for its future. And I want to say a little bit about what I think you all ought to do today. I I guess, an inveterate do-gooder. And over the last 40 years, I became involved in a lot of different nonprofit organizations, different boards. And what began to happen with me is, one, I got older. And as you get older, we're talking with one of my friends earlier today, and people started calling me Mr. Roberts. And for those of you who haven't gotten there yet, that's sort of like saying you really are old. So you no longer can be on a first name basis with me, because that's for young people and people who are my peers. You're not my peer. And so as I began to serve on a lot of boards, people would ask me to be on another board. I said, well, I can't do another board. I'm already overextended. And then they would say, and by the way, most of these boards were boards where there were not people of color other than me on the board. They would say, well, can you recommend somebody like you to be on the board? And what I began to realize is that the people who were like me were also like my age, my vintage. And so I said, we need to find a younger talent pool of Black professionals to begin to populate boards and commissions. And so initially what I did is I started to look around for organizations that were doing that, because I'm a firm believer that if something's going to be done, it has to be somebody's job. Anybody who's run a company and stuff, you just don't get things done because they need to be done. Somebody has to be responsible for it. And so finding that there was a lack of really folks who were focused on trying to recruit and train Black folks for boards, I said, well, then we ought to create that organization. I had a friend and an associate, a woman named Yvette Chappelle Ingram, who had been president of the Legislative Black Caucus Foundation here in California. And I really recruited Yvette to become my co-founder and to become the first person that we hired to actually run the African American Board Leadership Institute. We've been in existence now for a little more than 10 years, about 12 years. And over the years, we've recruited and trained and placed over 1,000 folks. And so you're about to become part of, for those of you who haven't gone through AABLI, part of a network of Black professionals that really span at this point in time the globe. We've trained people as far away as Kenya. We've had people from Canada. We've had people from the various islands. We've had people in the United States as far away as Maine. So there's a robust group of folks who are involved with AABLI. As we begin to do our work, we initially focused on nonprofit organizations and government commissions. And then there began to be this growing demand from our alums, well, we're interested in being on corporate boards. And so we began to do a program that we call the Pathway to Corporate Boards. And this is really that program and the idea is to try and equip you with information that you need to have, with techniques that you need to follow for those of you who are interested in serving on corporate boards. One of the things that you will hear oftentimes from people who serve on corporate boards is that they got their start being on nonprofit board. And so I really encourage people to join nonprofit boards, because that's where you can learn some of the things that you need to know, the etiquette of the boardroom. You need to know about invisible skills. How do you become effective as a board member and not get placed with a jacket that you're playing the race card when you want to do something for Black people or people of color? And so our basic board leadership program really kind of covers those areas. We cover in the BLP program, for those of you who have not done it, basically four key areas. One is, what are your fiduciary obligations as a board member? What is it that you should do? Um, and what the fiduciary obligations of a board member happen to be, it's the same whether it's a nonprofit organization or a for-profit organization. The other thing that we concentrate on is financial literacy. It's important that you're able to read a financial statement, know the difference between a financial statement and, let's say, a balance sheet, and be able to look at a balance sheet and very quickly decide whether or not the organization is healthy or it has issues that need to be addressed. We also talk about fundraising, because when you serve on a nonprofit board, oftentimes there will be an expectation that board members will raise resources for the organization. And what we try and do is help people understand that oftentimes the fundraising that you do with a nonprofit organization is oftentimes it's an investment in your career. I often say, I've spent most of my life being a poor advocate for things that I care about. But through my nonprofit board experience, I got to meet a number of people in this community who happen to be billionaires. We weren't in the same social class. We weren't even necessarily in the same club, but we had the same passion about certain issues. And meeting folks in that context where you're really an equal to them. They care about education. They may care about immigrant rights. They may care about other issues. And now you become on a first name basis with, an Eli Broad or Dick Ridden. I can use their names because they're deceased, but I got to know them because we shared a passion for reforming public education. And through that passion, it opened up the doors to doing other things with those folks. And so I say to a lot of people, think about serving on a nonprofit board as a way of extending your network and your reach into communities and with people you might not otherwise know or meet or be able to develop a peer relationship with. The other thing that we cover is what I like to call soft skills, and that simply is understanding the dynamics in the boardroom and how you can become an effective advocate for positions in the boardroom by understanding the power dynamics of the room. So that basic BLP program, I think, is really a good predicate for those of you who are interested in serving on corporate boards. And so I encourage you to look to us, for those of you who have not been through BLP, to think about going through BLP. Now, when we developed the corporate Pathway to Corporate Boards program, one of the things that we focused on and had conversations with is why us? Why should we do that? And for those of you who aren't aware, McKinsey and Company has done extensive studies about diversity in the boardroom. And the empirical facts are that the boards that are most diverse tend to be the most profitable organizations, and they also tend to have the highest stock prices. And McKinsey did a lot of work during the last Great Recession we had, 2008, 2009. And what they found is what you would expect. I always say, remember the old nursery rhyme about the king who was seduced by a couple of con artists into giving them gold so they could weave him garments of gold. And so everybody was told that if you don't see these garments of gold, there must be something with you. You're not worthy of being at court. You're not worthy of being a nobleman. And so the king eventually, he would go and he would look at the clothes and say, oh, they're really beautiful and stuff. And it wasn't until they had the final unveiling where the king was going to wear all of his gowns and stuff, that little boy said, the emperor has no clothes. And of course, he had no clothes. He was nude, but he thought he had clothes. Well, oftentimes what you get within a boardroom is you will get groupthink. Everybody that comes from a similar background, a similar socioeconomic status, they see the world and problems through the same prism. What happens when you have diversity, people are always talking about thinking outside the box. But if you have a diverse group of people sitting around a board table, you're going to get people who are thinking outside of your box because they grew up in another box. And so, what McKinsey has done is really documented the success of diversity in the boardroom. And they actually have a whole series of, you can go online, look up McKinsey on diversity, and you'll see lots and lots of things that they write about. They developed a whole line of consulting practice that they do around diversity and its value and stuff. And so that is something that we've used at AABLI as a rationale when we talk to funders and others for why should they give us money in order to support an organization that is focused on Black folks. And what my response has always been is we're focused on making Black folks be better for white folks because we're creating board members who will bring diversity to the boardroom and make those organizations more effective, more profitable than they otherwise would be. And that's worthy of your support. And fortunately, we've received that support. Over the years, we've worked with the state of California. Many of you may or may not be aware that a couple of years ago, California passed a law, it was Assembly Bill 979. And basically, what it did is it required that publicly traded companies in California have underrepresented folks serve on their board. And underrepresented is broadly defined as women, LGBTQ, and Black and brown folks. That law was declared unconstitutional last year, and it's currently on appeal. And I've been working with the state attorney general as one of their witnesses to try and see if we cannot get that determination of constitutionality or unconstitutionality overturned. We've also worked with NASDAQ. And again, many of you may not know that NASDAQ created a rule, not as strong as the California statute, which really had financial penalties in the event that boards did not become diverse. But NASDAQ has done something to require that companies listed on that exchange actually do a report on how they're doing with diversity on their boards. That rule that was approved by the SEC is under challenge by conservative legal organizations, much the same way that the law here in California has been challenged. So we're watching that to see. But notwithstanding the challenge to the rule, many of the companies that are on the NASDAQ exchange have embraced the rule, and they're really reporting on the diversity of their boards. A lot of them are now actually retaining search firms to help them diversify their boards, because again, the empirical evidence is that the more diverse a board happens to be, the more successful it's going to be. And companies are interested in being successful at what they do. We think that our organization is one that plays a role in trying to change the policies that impact America. You know, at its deepest sense, the purpose that I've always hoped that we would do is that we would begin to create a cadre of trained Black professionals who network together, have a commitment to really integrate, or I guess another way to say it, desegregate all of America in the boardroom. I'm one of those that believes the fish rots from the head down. And in any of our organizations that exist, whether nonprofit or for-profit, there are people sitting in a boardroom who decide on the allocation of resources. They decide as they control what the CEO does, who gets fired, who gets hired, where money is spent and invested. And, you know, there's an old saying, if you're not in the room, then you're on the menu. And so what in the Hamilton musical, there's a song they do. I want to be in the room where it happens, the room where it happens. And so our motto is to try and get the folks who go through the programming that we do to get to the room where it happens. That's what our goal is. That's what our mission is. And you all are part of that. Now, part of getting to the room where it happens is networking. And one of the things that I want to really encourage all of you here today is to network. And in a little bit, we'll break for lunch. And we have these breaks not because it's just nice to eat again, because we just had, but we have the breaks because you should get to know people at your table. You should get to know people at other tables. And so when we do take a break for lunch, it's going to be like a buffet lunch, and whether you eat or not eat. The point is, there'll be some time for you to go around, meet people. There'll be time later on in the day when we finish the program. We have networking at the end of the day, and the end of the day is not late. The end of the day is going to be somewhere around 3:30 or 4, so that you can spend some time just getting to meet the other folks who are here, because they become your fellow warriors in changing the complexion of the corporate landscape. And one of the things, and you'll hear it today from folks who've been on corporate boards, one of the important things is who do you know, and letting people know what your interests are, letting them know that you may want to serve on a board, letting them know that you may be qualified to serve on the board. You are here today, different techniques that people have employed to become corporate board members. I encourage you to think about writing some notes and listening carefully, because all of the people who are going to speak are knowledgeable, and they all have a little different perspective on how they got to where they are. And so one of the three speakers we have will definitely probably resonate with you and where you are currently. And we have some handouts that we'll give you. Our last speaker of the day is a man named John Driver. John is an engineer, very thoughtful, and he even took the time to construct, if you will, a step-by-step process that led to him joining a number of corporate boards. And unlike what you may have heard, it wasn't like he knew a lot of people that were on corporate boards, or he lived in New York, or he lived in LA, in the center where there were a lot of companies. And by just constructing a program to go from where he was to where he wanted to be, he had a step-by-step process that he followed, and it just worked for him. And you'll have a chance to meet with him and talk with him and ask him questions about what he has done and how he got to be where he is. The last thing that I want to say, and then I'm going to sit down and ask you all to begin to network. In about 10 minutes, those doors are going to open behind you, and there'll be a buffet lunch for you to eat. Our luncheon speaker will be here, and we'll start at about 12:30, and we're going to try and be on time so that we'll have an opportunity for you to hear, one, the speakers, two, to ask questions, three, to network with each other. And I hope you will have a really robust and wonderful experience here today. So I want to welcome you. I thank you for being here, and I look forward to meeting as many of you as possible. And hopefully you will become part of our AABLI family of folks who've gone through our training. Some say it's indoctrination. And the indoctrination part is I don't believe, I'll say this and I will sit down. You have an obligation with the space you occupy to do something positive with it. You know, I'm constantly reminded that we come from a group of enslaved people who some 140 years ago, they were given their freedom and that's it. No money, no 40 acres and a mule, no place to live, no place to go. And from nothing, and literally nothing, they created a world and we stand on their shoulders. They came out of bondage and created over 100 HBCUs. They created public education in the South where there was none. The landed gentry didn't want the enslaved people or the poor whites to be educated. They created public education so that everybody could be educated. They created banks. They created insurance companies. They created grocery companies. They created a series of Wall Streets. We hear a lot of talk about Black Wall Street, but there were Black Wall Streets all over America. It wasn't just Tulsa. It wasn't just Rosewood. There were literally enterprising ex-slaves that created a whole infrastructure, and we stand on their shoulders. You know, if you think about the history of America, we had slavery for longer than we've been free. Folks were enslaved for 250 years. The Civil War just ended about 150 years ago. And even after the Civil War ended, we had the Black Codes and the Ku Klux Klan, and the idea that we would have some sort of personal freedom really didn't happen until the Civil Rights Acts were passed in 1964 and 1965. In 1964 and 1965, it was still against the law in about half of America for there to be a mixed marriage. Mixed marriages were not declared unconstitutional until Loving versus Virginia in 1968. So if you think about the number of years that we've been free, and there are some people in this room that are my age, and we can remember when there was no Black caucus in Congress, there was only Adam Clayton Powell. We had one congressman. There were no Black elected officials. There were no Black mayors. There were no Black folks that were city council people. When Tom Bradley was elected mayor in this city in 1973, he was like Barack Obama. My wife used to be Tom Bradley's press secretary, and we were talking the other day about how she met the new King of England because he came here to see Tom Bradley. People from around the world came to see Tom Bradley because it was unbelievable to the rest of the world that a Black man could be elected mayor in a white city in America. So we've come a long way. We now have 53 people in the Black caucus in Congress. We have literally thousands of Black elected officials that are mayors and city council people and sheriffs. So if you take a look at the long arc of history, as Martin Luther King used to say, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And so one of the things that I like to say to Black folks especially is we're in a long war, but we're winning. You know, if you compare the life of Black folks 100 years ago to the life of Black folks today, we're significantly better off. Is it best? No, it's not best. But what it means is that change is possible. Change only occurs if there are people who are agitating for change. As Representative Lewis used to say, you got to make good trouble. And I like to think that what we're trying to do as an organization is to encourage people to, one, make good trouble, but two, don't forget your roots. Don't think that you are where you are because of you and you are alone. You are where you are because there are people who died and sacrificed so that you could have the right to vote, so that you could go to college, so that you had the ability and the skills to be in the room where it happens. So when you're in that room where it happens, don't forget the people who died to put you in that room. And don't forget that you have an obligation to continue the struggle. We're in the midst of one of the great wars that any country can have. And I like to say that if you read the Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln was very prescient when he said, Fourscore and 7 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we're engaged in this great civil war to, to test whether this nation or any nation so conceived can long endure. This is the oldest democracy in the world. The American experiment, which is what it is an experiment in the way in which you can take people who are not born here, but people who come here, and because of a commitment to a principle and a worldview that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, you can be an American. What we're faced with now are folks who believe that that history and that value proposition is one they no longer want to embrace. It's up to us to make sure that multiracial democracy, which is how this country was founded, remains, grows, and prospers. And for it to remain, grow, and prosper, we have to be vigilant in every room, whether it's boardroom, classroom, wherever we are. Our responsibility to ourselves and to our forefathers is to continue to fight to make this an open and a free and a democratic society. So when you sit in a boardroom, don't just think about, don't think narrowly, think broadly about the responsibilities that you have to yourself, to your community, and to your ancestors to try and make this the country that it can be, the country that we want it to be. We have a role to play in that. And I like to think that all AABLI alums understand that mission, that charge, and that together we begin to form an organization in which we know one another, we work together with one another, and we can begin to have the kind of impacts on society that we want to have. Diversity makes a difference. We represent that diversity. We need to be in the room where it happens. So I'm going to stop now because I could talk for a long time. The one thing I would ask all of you to do is, if you haven't done so, turn around and introduce yourself to everybody at the table where you sit. Say a little something about who you are, how you got here. And what I'm hopeful that we're going to do is create connections with people in the room, because the connectivity is what gives us strength. The analogy you probably all heard is, if you try to beat somebody up with your finger, you'll end up with a broken finger. But if you get your fingers united and you beat them up with the fist, you're going to have an impact. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to take all of our individuality and move together in a collective way where we can have the kind of societal impact that I think we can have. So thank you.